Hello there, welcome to today's Geography Masterclass. In this session we're going to be again looking at GCSE Geography with the AQA exam board. We're going to be looking at exam paper 2, challenges in the human environment, so human geography. And the particular topic we're going to be looking at is the challenge of resource management. Now, let's have a look at the learning outcomes for this session. So we'll start off with level 1 to 3. This is basically GCSE grades 1 to 3. In order to achieve this grade, you'll need to have a basic understanding of challenges associated with food, water and energy in the UK. Okay, so you're looking at like demand for food, supply of energy, okay, and how these things are changing, and also things like water supply. Where does the water come from and where is it needed most? So that's what we're going to be looking at. And also you'll be able to describe the challenges and solutions to global food supply and global food management. If we move on to level 4 to 6 now, okay, your understanding is going to move from basic to clear, and this will come across in your written answers. And again, your clear understanding will be associated with managing food, water and energy within the UK, whilst also being able to explain the challenges and solutions associated with food management on a global scale. See the difference between describe and explain. Describe what's it like, explain why is it like it, and you'll be using phrases in your answer such as this means that to develop it from a description to an explanation. Finally, if we look at learning outcomes 7 to 9, your understanding will now be detailed. Okay, so your geographical understanding, your explanation will be really detailed, and any examples and case study facts you use will be accurate. So numbers of things, locations of things. Okay, so this is where you need to be detailed in terms of your understanding and knowledge. When we come to global food supply and global food management, you need to be able to evaluate. Now, evaluate means you will look at a particular project, for example, maybe a large-scale food supply project, and you look at the opportunities, the good things, and also the challenges. So how has a particular scheme helped people, made more money, economic, improved the environment, but also how has it damaged the environment? Has it cost people money? And do some people lose out more than others? Okay. And also evaluation, you'll be able to potentially, suggest some ways to make these things better. Now, the big picture, so this is basically what we're going to be doing in this session. All right, we're going to be looking at resources, and the major 3 resources we will look at are food, water and energy. And these are clearly linked with economic and social well-being. Okay, if your country has not got a secure supply of energy, it's going to be very difficult for industry to develop. So that's going to have a knock-on effect onto the country's economy, and we will see this happening. In terms of social well-being, if you haven't got a reliable source of clean water, you're more likely to be ill. Okay, and that's going to affect your quality of life. So resources are key for standard of living, economic, and quality of life, social. Now, in terms of the world, there's inequality. Some countries have great access to all these resources. Some countries don't have such good access to these resources. And we're going to be looking at the distribution more generally. Moving to the UK, okay, you need to have an understanding of all 3 of these resources. So food, water and energy. Who wants it? Where does it come from? How is it being managed? And is this demand changing? For example, do we need more water or less? Where do we need it? In terms of the key resource we'll be looking at in more detail, we do food. Okay, so the global demand for food is rising, but there's still countries that are suffering from food insecurity. All right, if you don't know what this means now, don't worry, we'll go into it during this session. Okay, and as a result of food insecurity, there's conflict breakout. Lots of things we need to know about this. But it's not all doom and gloom. There are some strategies that are being implemented, and this is increasing, okay, availability of food, food supply more generally, and food security. Okay, so these are the instructions for success, and this is basically how this masterclass will run. So there's going to be 3 elements to this masterclass. First of all, you're going to have the teaching slides. Think of these as mini episodes, if you will. Okay, and this will give you information from myself, but also a video explanation with images from a teacher. Now, during this, listen very carefully, look at the images, pause if you need to, and take down notes that are important. The next mini episode or phase of this masterclass will be the working slides, and these will be timed exam questions from past papers, okay? And you're going to use your knowledge from your brain and the videos you've just watched and the tips from me to answer these to a really high standard. So hopefully you can achieve really, really high grades. Finally, okay, you're going to have the assessment slides. Now, this is going to be mark schemes, and these mark schemes are going to be from the exam board, and I will talk you through how you can assess your own work, whilst also looking out for any common pitfalls that you may have fell into that we can avoid in real exams. Right then, here we go. Here's our first video. I must say, listen to how many times me and Mr. Bato say okay during these videos, because it seems to be our favourite phrase. Anyway, first one is global distribution of resources. Global means the world, and distribution means spread out. Okay, so how are resources spread out around the world? And let's watch this video.
Okay, so the global distribution of resources. When we think about resource, it's just anything that has values. That might be energy, it might be land, it might be gold. But in geography, we focus on food, water and energy as the main 3 resources. And generally in LICs and HICs, there is very different access to and availability of those 3 resources. So we can see the percentage of the population that are undernourished, so our darkest shade of red. We can see that the majority of countries where people are undernourished are in sub-Saharan Africa. And part of the problems is that people have different availability of food. So in HICs we have supermarkets, whereas in LICs, some people, particularly in rural areas, struggle to access food, and it takes up quite a lot of time in their day. We also have a similar pattern of water scarcity, so we can see generally the countries are in the southern hemisphere and around the equator, so also affecting sub-Saharan Africa in general, but also South America and parts of Southeast Asia. That also means that water, and particularly clean water, has different levels of availability around the world. It's also, countries also use their water differently. So in high-income countries, water is more likely to be used for industrial use, whereas in low and middle-income countries, it's more likely to be used for agricultural use, which is a problem for subsistence farmers if water is not readily available. Finally, global energy consumption. So most of the world's energy gets used by OECD countries, or the 34 of the world's most developed countries, with LICs and NEEs taking up a smaller portion of the world's overall global energy consumption.
Right, thanks Mr. Bato. What a brilliant video talking about the distribution of food, water and energy around the world. And I must say, I think Mr. Bato's got a lovely little beard, don't you agree? Alright then, so this is your first exam question. Now, in the resources exam questions that are right at the end of paper 2, and there will be a lot of questions that involve using maps of the world, because we're looking at these resources on a global scale a lot of the time. So it says, study figure 9, a map showing world oil consumption in 2016. Now think about it. Rich countries are going to use more oil. That means they've got more cars, so it's easy to travel. They've got more industry, maybe potentially even selling some of that oil to other countries as well. That means that they're going to be very wealthy. And wealthier countries tend to have, okay, higher standards of living and higher qualities of life. Now, your first task, quite straightforward. You got to look at that map. There's a key at the bottom, and that is essential. And you need to know your continents. On this particular map, they have been kind and told you the names of the continents, but they might not. So don't bank on that. That should take you about 1 minute. Once you have done that, there is another question that says using figure 9 and your own understanding. Okay? It says suggest how inequalities in the consumption of resources influence well-being. Okay? Inequalities, unequal. Some people have more than others. Okay? And how can that influence well-being? So I think of quality of life, which can be linked to standard of living. The only other tip I'm going to give you, it says using figure 9. Start that answer in figure 9 and direct your thinking to that map before you start suggesting your own ideas. Okay, there's 4 marks there. The first one you hopefully do in about 40 seconds, so you'll have a little bit longer on the second one. You've got 4 minutes, so please pause the video now for 4 minutes. Alright guys, so welcome back. Now before we look at the actual mark scheme, I'm just going to go back to the actual figure that it provided you with. So it says, what is the difference between Africa and North America's share of world oil consumption shown in figure 9? So here's figure 9. Now first thing I would have done is looked at the key. So each little white box or little square is 1% of world oil consumption. Now if we look at the continent of Africa, there's 4 little boxes, so 4%. Whereas if we look at North America, there's 5, 10, 15, 20, 24 little boxes, so that's 24%. Now there's different answers you could give. You could have said that Africa has 20% of what North America has. The most common answer I'd expect is 6 times greater, because 6 times Africa's 4% would be North America's 24%. Or you could have put 500% more. It does say percentage sign not necessary, but I think most people would have hopefully gone for 6 times more. Now the second question, okay, it was not a level marked answer, it was a point marked answer, worth 3 marks. Now it says using figure 9 and your own understanding, suggest how inequalities in the consumption of resources influence well-being. Alright, now before I even attempted that answer, I would have wrote in figure 9. So there's no argument, you're using that figure. Okay, so the examiners know you're using that figure. Now there's different ways that you could have approached it. What I would have said is ultimately the more oil a country has, the more opportunities for economic development, the richer it is, the better standard of living, the better quality of life. Now, it starts talking about Asia Pacific, but I think we're probably more likely to get the marks talking about Africa and richer countries more generally. So you could have said, in figure 9, it shows Africa has the lowest share of world oil consumption at 4%. You're just stating a fact. And you could say, this links to, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, which has low levels of well-being measured through indicators such as HDI. You could have said, because in sub-Saharan African countries, they have low literacy rates or low life expectancies. That is your second mark for developing that point. You then can turn your attention to richer countries and say, richer countries will have the means to purchase oil and therefore energy for personal use and industrial development. Okay, so richer countries, such as the USA in North America, they've got more money, they can purchase more oil, their industry can develop, people can drive around in cars. Alright, so that's all you needed to do. I will draw your attention for this. Max 1 mark if no reference to figure 9. If you don't use that figure, you can only get 1 mark. And it says reserve 3rd mark, so the top mark, for explicit reference to the map in figure 9. So you can't get 3 marks unless you talk about something from the map. So it says using figure 9, start in figure 9. Okay, let's move on. Oh, he looks a bit like me. Let's move on now to energy in the UK. Okay, so we're going to be looking at where energy comes from, how we make our energy, and how supply and demand has changed over time, and the potential opportunities such as fracking and renewable energy and the challenges they create also. So we'll watch this video, same again, take notes, look at the images. Let's go.
Right, provision of energy in the UK. The UK's energy mix has changed over time. Energy mix is the range and proportion of energy coming from different sources. As you can see, in 1990, vast majority of our energy come from fossil fuels. Moving on to 2007, nuclear energy was thrown into the energy mix, with now a third of our energy coming from nuclear power stations. Moving on to 2014, in addition to these previous methods of energy production, we're now adding renewable energy such as wind, solar and tidal. Now, majority of our energy previously come from North Sea oil and gas reserves, but as this reserve has dwindled, we've started importing more of our energy from abroad. For example, Norway, Russia and the European gas pipeline. This next chart shows us how much renewable energy we are using. If we look at offshore and onshore wind, we can see this is one of the biggest sources of renewable energy in the UK. And as the UK is the most windy nation in the whole of Europe, it makes sense that we pursue this method of energy production. Finally, fracking is another option available for the UK to produce energy. Fracking involves drilling down deep into the shale, pumping water and chemicals into the shale rock to force out the fracking gas. However, this causes large amounts of conflict because the environmental impacts and the fact that people's homes and properties may be damaged during the process.
Okay, wicked. So let's have a look at this question then. Like many questions in the resource management part of the exam paper, there are going to be graphs and things for you to work from. So it says, study figure 10, a graph showing the UK's changing energy mix from 2006 to 2016. Now, if we look at the x-axis along the bottom, this is where we get our energy from. So coal, oil and gas, the fossil fuels, finite, non-renewable. Nuclear, it's not a fossil fuel, but it's also not renewable. And our renewables down this right-hand side of the graph. If we look at the y-axis, it is simply a number, and that's the percentage of energy generated. Okay, so the light grey 2006, dark grey 2016. Just very quickly glancing at this, well, coal has gone from 37.5% down to 9% in 10 years. That's a massive change. If we look at gas, there's been a significant increase of over 10%. Nuclear's gone up a bit, but we've seen most dramatic changes with our renewables. So wind and solar onshore, wind offshore, and bioenergy. All right. Now, with any figure question, okay, feel free to write on it. So if you can print this off and write on that sheet, even better, it'll help target your writing. But let's have a look at the question. It says, using figure 10, okay, so that graph, and your own understanding, the stuff in your brain, discuss the issues arising from the UK's changing energy mix. All right. Now, it's not asking you to come to a decision. It's not asking you to what extent. It's giving you free rein, really, to discuss the issues associated with where we got energy from before and where we get energy from now. Okay. I would start your answer in figure 10, so you don't forget to write about the figure, but always remember to add your own understanding because it tells you to do that. It's a 6-mark exam question, 6 minutes. Have an extra minute if you need it. Pause now. Off you go. All right, then, welcome back. Hopefully you had a good go at that question. Now, let's have a look at the mark scheme. It's a level response answer. So your answer will fit into either basic, 1 to 2 marks, clear, 3 to 4 marks, or detailed, 5 to 6 marks. Now, this is an AO2 and AO3 question. So AO2 is your geographical understanding. Can you explain the issues associated with our changing energy mix? And AO3 is applying your knowledge to that graph So basically interpreting that graph, understanding that graph and applying your knowledge to it. Now, basic, clear, detailed, that's just the quality of your response. So if your response is here, there and everywhere and it doesn't really make sense, but you do use the graph a little bit and you understand that burning fossil fuels is bad, you're probably going to get basic. But we want to aim for clear and detailed. Okay? Now this is the indicative content. So there's a clear shift in figure 10 from fossil fuels, particularly coal, because that went down a lot over the 10 years, to renewables. So that's something you could mention. Okay? But you can't just, to get the top marks, you can't just say, spot the trend and talk about it. You need to show your understanding. Okay? So, if you were talking about opportunities, you could say, well, because there's more renewable energy sources in the UK's energy mix, maybe development of wind farms, it's going to create jobs, it's going to create new opportunities. We've talked about Liverpool and the surrounding area in the northwest having an awful lot of wind turbines. So you could write about this and the opportunities it creates. Also, burning coal, as we know, is not good for the environment because there's lots of chemicals released into the atmosphere. So ultimately, you're going to have cleaner air. Okay, so that's a social opportunity, quality of life improves, but also things like global warming are going to reduce, aren't they, because we're burning less fossil fuels. Challenges though, okay, we know about Margaret Thatcher and deindustrialisation. What will those coal miners do? If they've got no skills in this new sector of the economy, the renewables, if they've been used to going underground and digging coal out for 10, 20 years, there's going to be unemployment. Increased nuclear. Now, nuclear energy is a great resource, but it's got danger associated with it. Okay, the fact that the waste produced is incredibly dangerous and needs to be stored for long periods of time could be discussed. I think the easier way though is talk about the reliability. It's not always blowing wind. Okay, the sun is not always shining. So what do we do when the sun is not shining? Do we still need the backup coal-powered fire stations? Do we still need the nuclear? Or do we need a way to store this energy? And sadly, as of yet, there's not been an ideal way to store this energy. It's a cost-effective way. Okay? So have a look at your answer. Is there anything you could improve? It's a tricky question, but now you've seen the mark scheme, hopefully you'll be okay with it. Alright guys, so let's move on. We're going to be looking at water in the UK. So we're going to be looking at water supply, where does it come from? Water management, how do we manage the water to make sure it's safe for people to use, and how demand varies across the country. So we're going to let Mr. Bato deliver this awesome mini teaching episode for us. He looks like he's saying a prayer there before he goes. Let's have a listen to Mr. Bato.
So the provision of water in the UK. So increasingly common are headlines about how the UK is running short of water. So if we have a look at our water demand in the UK, we can see most of our water in the UK gets used in households, 47%. And within that household use, most of it is used for flushing toilets, 30%. So two maps here, one of precipitation or rainfall, one of population density. We can see most of the rainfall, the darkest colour, falls in the northwest of Scotland. Areas with less precipitation are the southeast of England. Whereas in terms of population density, the northwest of Scotland has the lowest population density, whereas the southeast of England has the highest population density. That means that the southeast of England is likely to be in a water deficit because the supply of water will be lower than the demand for water. Whereas in the northwest of Scotland, they are likely to have a water surplus, where the supply of water exceeds the demand for water. That leads to areas such as the southeast of England, but also the southwest of England, being in severe water stress. In order to combat this problem, the UK uses water transfer. So an example is in Birmingham, where there's a high population density and low rainfall. We transfer water from the Elam Valley in Wales, where there is high precipitation and low population density. In order to ensure that the water is quality and clean, we can monitor river water quality scientifically. We can also use water treatment centres like this Severn Trent one, from the Midlands. We can also use hosepipe bans during periods of drought. However, despite all these efforts by the Environment Agency, groundwater supplies have still been polluted by runoff of chemicals from farming, fertilisers, as well as industrial waste and contaminants from factories.
All right, thank you, Mr. Bato. Some excellent terminology used in that video. So that's the teaching mini episode. We're now going to be looking at the working slide. So again, like many of the resource management questions, there is a figure for you to work from. So this figure, hopefully you know what countries are in that map without me telling you. It says, study figure 10, a map showing proposed water transfer schemes in England and Wales and some information about population change. So straight away, okay, your brain should be thinking, right, water transfer schemes, moving water, all right, and population change. Is this going to be something to do with more people needing more water? Okay, chances are it is. So if we look at the map, the key shows us that the red lines show proposed water transfer, all right, and the direction it is flowing through. So we've got Kielder Water or Kielder Reservoir in Northumberland. We've got the red line taking it down to Newark, which is relatively close to Nottingham, all the way down to London. And if we look at the other schemes, we've got water being transferred from Wales and some from Birmingham to Oxfordshire. All right, what's it saying about London? London's population is growing at double the UK average rate. All right, that's going to suggest, all right, there's going to be high demand for water there. And as that video has just showed us, not necessarily the heaviest precipitation. Again, Oxfordshire, its population is set to explode, especially the rural areas of Oxfordshire, okay, which are seeing rapid population growth. All right, so it says, using figure 10 and your own understanding, so use that figure and your brain, suggest how the proposed water transfer schemes will help meet the changing demand for water in the UK. All right. So I would start off, as always, if you've got access to this printed out, you can circle on any key things. But I would start off saying, in figure 10, give an overview of what it's saying. So basically, there's water transfer schemes taking the water to areas that population is growing rapidly. And then bringing your knowledge from that video about where there is heavy precipitation, water surplus, and areas with lower precipitation and lots of demand, water deficit. You could also use the keyword water stress in there. Now it's 6 marks, so 6 minutes. If you pause now, maybe give yourself an extra minute, 7 minutes. I'll see you shortly. Okay guys, so let's have a look at this mark scheme then. So again, it is a level response answer, 6 marks. So you can either have level 1 basic, limited understanding, level 2 clear. Okay, so you got some understanding and you apply your knowledge and understanding by analysing the resource, up to detailed, which is a detailed understanding, and you demonstrate that you can apply your knowledge in a thoroughly and effective way. All right, so indicative content then. All right, so first thing it says is students should be making some assessment of how proposed water transfers will meet the increased future need in the UK. So is it going to work? All right, is moving water from one place to another going to work? And I would say to an extent it is. All right, and how will they do that? All right, this is where you need to start bringing in your ideas. How will moving water from one place to another help? All right, try and bring in the ideas of, well, the areas they're moving the water from have high precipitation, lower population densities. This means they have a water surplus. Whereas Oxfordshire and London have already got high populations, and the figure is telling you they're getting bigger, Well, if there's more people, they're going to need more water. Okay. In addition to this, all right, you need to think, is it just more people in these areas that is increasing the water stress? Or is it the fact that these people are having bigger houses? Okay, maybe they're having bigger gardens that need watering, more appliances in the home, bigger baths that use more water, dishwashers. Will simply moving water solve the problem, or are there other things that you need to think about? Maybe installing water meters so people use less water, or encouraging people to buy more energy and water efficient appliances that use less water. Okay, so that's how you have to answer the question. Write about what the maps, interpret what the map's showing you, say what that means, and bring in your own knowledge about water surplus, water deficit, and water transfer. Have a look, see how many marks you think you got, and then see if you can improve your answer. Alright then, moving on. Food in the UK. Now, purposely done food in this order because we look at food on a global scale. So we'll look at water and energy in the UK. Now we're looking at food. And then we will look more after this video on food more generally around the world. But this particular video, alright, again, it looks like he's praying for something there. Bless him, Mr. Thicky. He's going to be looking at food demand, where we get our food from, and techniques we can potentially use in the future to increase this, to meet this demand by increasing the supply. So we're looking at agribusiness and organic farming. Let's go.
Provision of food in the UK. If you look at this pie chart, you can see that just over half of the UK's food consumption comes from homegrown products, whereas the other half of food production comes from elsewhere. Why does the UK import so much food? Due to the ever-changeable weather and potentially extreme weather in the UK, there is risk of crop failure. Secondly, the cost of farm labour and cow feed is very expensive in the UK, so it's cheaper for us to source our food from other countries. The UK consumer demands a range of exotic foods, many of which can't be grown in our country. Also, UK consumers want access to out-of-season produce like strawberries all year round, and due to our climate we cannot always grow these in the UK. Finally, UK supermarkets, they're in competition with each other, so they go around the world trying to source the cheapest possible products. However, an issue with importing food is food miles. Okay, this is the distance food travels from where it is grown to the consumer's plate. An example we can talk about is Monge 2, which is grown in Kenya, which is about 6,000 kilometres away from the UK. In response to trying to reduce our demand for foreign produce, agribusiness invests high amounts of money in technology such as combine harvesters so we can produce large amounts of food in the UK. Another option for UK farmers is agricultural developments in organic produce, which is when farmers don't use machinery or chemicals and the food they produce is of brilliant quality.
All right, and an example of an agribusiness in the UK that you could refer to is Latham's Farm in East England. Okay then, so this one is a bit of a nicer question for you, but still, all marks that you can build up to get that brilliant grade that you deserve for working so hard. So, 3 marks, 3 minutes. First question. Study figure 10, a diagram showing the average number of food miles travelled by 3 products in the UK. So we've got bananas, and they travel 5,523 miles. Strawberries travel 907 miles, and oranges 1,714 miles. Now it's a basic image, pictogram, to think of a better word for it, interpretation question, and a bit of maths. So 3.1, approximately how many times is the average food miles for bananas greater than that for strawberries? Shade 1 circle. Okay, so if you've got a calculator, which you have in the exam, you should be able to work that one out nice and easily. Remember, to answer this question on the actual exam, for the one you're choosing, you just colour in the little circle or oval in the middle. Alright, next question, nice little 2 marker. How does increasing food miles lead to a larger carbon footprint? Alright, I think you're going to be able to do this one nice and easily. Food miles is the distance from where food is grown to the farmer's plate. If there's more food miles, how is that going to increase carbon footprint? Now, 3 marks, 3 minutes. This is where you might be able to shave a bit of time off to spend more time on your bigger questions. But give yourself 3 minutes, pause the video now, and have a go. Alright guys, I hope you found that relatively straightforward. So, the first question, nice and easy. Whoa, doesn't like that. The answer is C, 6, and that's worth 1 mark. Ultimately, if you divided the larger number by the smaller number, it come out to about 6.01 or something like that. Otherwise, you could just try and multiply it how many times you need to multiply it to get to that figure. But yeah, nice, easy 1 mark. And ultimately, if you haven't got much time left in the exam, just have a go. I mean, it takes 1 second to have a guess. It's better than leaving it blank. You got a 1 in 4 chance of getting it correct. The second question, again, nice and easy in my opinion. So, more food miles equals more transport. If there's more transport, there's more fuel being burnt, whether it be petrol or diesel delivering it, whether it be a boat, an aeroplane, a truck, and more fuel that's burnt, more air pollution. A big part of that air pollution is CO2, which increases our carbon footprint. Okay, so if you didn't get that, you can improve it, but hopefully you did really well at that. Okay, back to my main man, Mr. Bato. Okay, we are looking now at global food supply. So not just in the UK, we're looking at food supply around the world. So let's listen to Mr. Bato and see what he can tell us about global food supply. Remember, take notes if you can. If not, just listen very carefully. And remember, it's a video, so if you want to pause and rewind, perfect opportunity to do so.
Okay, so the global food supply. So as we can see, in terms of global food consumption, the darkest colours show us that most food is consumed in North America and Western Europe. Whereas when we think about global food production, it's dominated by the USA, India and China. When we think about global food insecurity, which is when people aren't sure they're going to have enough food to live a healthy life, it's largely concentrated in sub-Saharan Africa. Climate is a massive factor in whether or not people have food security or enough food supply. So some countries just simply don't have a climate that is suitable for producing high crop yields. Climate change is exacerbating or making that problem even worse as more farmers are forced to farm on marginal land that doesn't produce very high crop yields. As a result, you can see the crop yields of maize and wheat globally have reduced. And finally, drought is also a massive contributing factor to low crop yields. With a lack of water, farmers struggle to have enough water to water their crops. But mechanisation is also a factor as well, so HICs are more likely to farm using machinery, whereas LICs, people are more likely to be subsistence farming with manual labour. And finally, 1 billion people across the world live below the poverty line. Those people will have food insecurity because they simply don't earn enough money, and affording food is a daily struggle.
Okay, so loads of excellent information in that video. Okay, it's basically where does our food come from and what are the challenges that some places face when trying to produce enough food for the globe. Now, this question is about food security. Alright, and it says, outline, which means basic explanation, just give an outline of the issue. One reason why some countries have a significant risk to food security. Okay, so food security is not having enough access to healthy food or reliable access to healthy food. Pick one of those reasons in that video that we've just watched and elaborate on it a little bit. So choose your reason and say why that is going to impact upon food security. And you could even use a name of a country, an LIC that we've studied in your answer. 2 marker, 2 minutes, pause the video now, please. Okay, then let's have a look at this assessment slide. So the question was asking you, so why are some countries at risk of being food insecure or having a food security risk? Quite straightforward. You get 1 mark for a basic statement. So some countries have a risk to their food supply because they are poor. All right. And if you develop that for your 2nd mark, so they are unable to buy food if the prices rise on the world markets. Bit more complicated than I'd like to go, but that's one way you could do it. The poverty line and they can't afford food. Another one, climatic hazards such as drought can damage the food supply or make it impossible to grow food in the first place. And as crops may have lower yields, there will be less food available. Or as crops are destroyed, there is less food available. Or because there's less food available, the price goes up and people living in poverty can't afford to buy it. So have a look. Simple 2 marks. Improve your answer and let's move on. All right then. So kind of touched on what food insecurity is. All right. In this video, we're going to look at the impacts of food insecurity. So if people are food insecure, what are the impacts? He looks like he's had all his prayers answered now, so let's watch this guy, Mr. Thicket, tell us all about it.
Impacts of food insecurity. Food insecurity is when a government or an individual cannot provide enough food, and this creates social, economic and environmental impacts. Social impacts can be seen in Somalia between the years 2010 and 2012, when famines were widespread across the country. This led to people waiting in huge lines in the hope that NGOs such as the Red Cross would provide them with a food parcel. Other instances of food insecurity can be seen in Laos, in Asia, where undernutrition is a regular occurrence and people just don't have enough calories needed to fulfill a healthy life. Economic impacts are also a result of food insecurity. This blue line shows the food price index. As you can see, the higher the line, the more incidence of social unrest, when people are arguing between themselves and the government because they are hungry. For example, the past decade, Venezuela has seen regular food riots. Finally, environmental impacts of food insecurity. Over-farming of land can lead to soil erosion, and once soil erosion has taken place, this land can no longer be used to grow food.
Okay, so we've got there several impacts, social, economic, environmental, of food insecurity. All right, another nice 2 marker. It's suggest 1 question. So not 2 reasons, just 1. Suggest 1 way in which food insecurity might affect the quality of life of people. Now, there's 2 examples that you could have used in that video. So the social example, all right, was talking about East Africa. What could you write about that? And the other example that's going to affect quality of life of people is the example in Venezuela. So that was an economic issue, but obviously it's going to affect people's quality of life and level of happiness. You only need to talk about one of them because it says in bold 1. 2 marker, 2 minutes. Pause the video now and have a go. All right then, so 2 mark question. Quite straightforward. The mark scheme's quite straightforward. 1 mark if you identify a point, and the 2nd mark for some extension of the identified point or some appropriate development. Okay, so you could say, due to lack of food of high quality in Laos, in Asia, All right, people do not consume enough calories. They are malnourished, and this leads to a lower life expectancy. Or you could say in Venezuela, in South America, due to shortages of food, there is conflict between people and the police, and conflict and arguments affect people's quality of life, because I don't really want to go around fighting with the police every day when all I want is something to eat. Okay, so make a point from that video and then elaborate it. Okay, you know how you feel when you're hungry. Imagine if that was all the time. It's going to affect your health, isn't it? It's going to make you unhappy. All right, so improve your answer and then we'll move on. All right, so here's my main man Bato talking about increasing food supply. All right, yeah, his prayers have been answered as well. He's staring right at the camera, ready to do some quality teaching. So these are some strategies that can be used to increase food supply. All right, watch the video carefully, take notes. If you need to rewind the video or pause it while you jot the notes down, go for it. Let's go.
Okay, so increasing food supply. So if we have a look at the food supply around the world, most of the food is produced in the USA, India or China. But if we have a look at the food consumption, we can see that there are large parts of Africa, large parts of South America where people aren't consuming very much food. So we need to find a way to increase the food supply for these LICs. One of the ways that we can do this is irrigation. We can either do this from the surface or subsurface underground. We can use a drip irrigation system, very simple, or we can use drones. But irrigation is just artificially watering the land. We can also use a process called aeroponics, where we fire a nutrient mist over plants, and then plants are able to uptake the nutrients from the mist. That's what it looks like in real life. There is also hydroponics as well. Hydro, thinking about water. Instead of using water, they use a nutrient solution to give all the plants the nutrients they need to improve crop yields, and that's what that looks like in real life. The next thing is the new green revolution. So the old green revolution was all about improving crop yields. The new one is about sustainability. So you can see some terracing that's happened here in order to conserve parts of the land. You can also see here that there's some soil conservation is happening by not using all of the land. So some of it has been used, some of it has been left to recuperate. Also biotechnology, so genetic modification of plants to make them more drought resistant or more pest resistant, or just to make them bigger or produce higher yields. And finally, appropriate technology that is simple and easy to use for communities in low-income countries. An example here is a bicycle that's been converted into a sheller for maize.
Okay, some brilliant ideas there. I like the way of thinking about not all these technologies appropriate for people in LICs, but this particular one, it's Mr. Bato's favourite. It's amazing. All right, something as simple as putting that little bit of engineering on the back of a bike that can pedal, and super quickly the corn comes off the cob. Right, and guys, after watching that great video, let's have a go at this question. It is an explain question. Explain how food security can be improved even. Explain. If you see the word explain, you should be thinking this means that. Might be worth jotting TMT down on the paper. Food security. So basically having enough food, reliable supply of food, a fair value, fair price for the food, and it's nutritious food. All right. So straightforward. Explain how food security can be improved. You've got several different options available to you from the video that we've just watched. Choose a couple of them, explain them, away you go. 6 marks, 6 minutes. Pause the video here. Okay guys, so hopefully you've had a good go at that question and answer. 3 levels, okay, basic knowledge and understanding, clear, specific and accurate knowledge and understanding, all the way up to level 3, which is thorough and detailed understanding. Alright, Now, question is talking about food security. It might be worth in your first sentence defining food security. Say to the examiner, bang, I know exactly what I'm talking about, I'm going to tell you about it. Alright? And it can be defined as, this is the definition from this exam paper, when people have physical and economic access to enough safe, sufficient and nutritious food to meet their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy lifestyle. Okay, that's quite a complicated definition, but why not learn it? Why not learn it? Now, there's loads of different examples you could talk about, like the examples in the video. I think keep it close to home. You could talk about mechanisation, so using large agricultural vehicles such as combine harvesters. You could talk about the investment made in Latham's farm in East England, and that's going to increase crop yields. All right. You could talk about genetically modified crops and the fact that genetically modified crops grow stronger, grow faster, they're more drought resistant, and they're more pest resistant. So they're more resistant things like insects trying to eat them. Other examples, you could go really high tech. You could talk about drones that monitor farmers' fields to save time checking to see if plants are ill. In terms of pastoral farming, so chickens, some chicken coops now, massive chicken coops, have got robots in there that test the quality of the air and, you know, tell the farmers if a chicken's ill or if anything needs to be done about it. Loads of different examples. All right, and you could also talk about aeroponics, hydroponics, things like that. Have a look at the mark scheme, see if there's anything you could improve it, and then we'll move on. All right, then let's have a look at sustainable food supply or sustainable food production. Go on, Mr. Thicket, go for it.
Sustainable food production. There's many elements in the supply of sustainable food. Today we're going to be looking at the production of food. First up is organic farming. Organic farming is the type of farming that does not use machinery, but instead it uses manpower, and there is no need for chemicals such as pesticides and chemicals used to help grow the crops, having limited impact on the environment. Another example of sustainable food production is permaculture. If you look in this image, this farm has been created in the confines of the natural landscape, and local material has been used for stuff such as these planter boxes, this wooden gate, and this compost heap. Next up is urban farming. Urban farming is taking place here in Detroit between two industrial buildings. This land would usually be wasted, however it's being used to grow crops, thus reducing food miles. Next up is the Marine Stewardship Council. This is sustainable fish supplies. The MSC ensure that trawlers don't overfish the seas and fish supplies remain sustainable. This next image looks like a bunch of cows in a field. That's because it is. This is a Welsh farm producing sustainable meat. It has very limited impact on the natural environment. The next image shows seasonal produce. Eating locally sourced seasonal produce reduces the need to import food from other countries, thus reducing our carbon footprint and food miles. And finally, food waste. 1/3 of all food produced is wasted. Ensuring we do not waste food will ensure we have a more sustainable supply of food.
Okay, so loads of different examples of how we can produce food more sustainably there. In the specification, it expects you to know each of those. Alright, so basically the name of it, how it works, and then being able to explain and outline in a bit more detail how that's going to increase food supply. So if we have a look at our next question, okay, it is a 6 marker, no figure this time, and it says, explain how different strategies can be used to make food supplies more sustainable. Now the first word says explain. When you see the word explain, I would, if I were you, I'd write TMT next to the word, and those initials mean this means that. If you write a sentence and put "this means that" in it, you can turn it into an explanation from a description. It says how different strategies. You need to use more than one to access the highest marks. Otherwise, it would just say explain how one strategy. It says different strategies. And then again, to make food supplies more sustainable. All right. Remember, the word sustainable means providing for people now, in this case food, without damaging the environment for future generations. You got 6 minutes. Pause the video now. Off you go. Okay, then let's have a look at the mark scheme for this question. Straight away, as we've done a couple of times now, it's a level response question. So you've got a basic response, clear response, detailed. Basic, it's going to be generalised knowledge, might not necessarily be sustainable, but you do still get marks if you put some general knowledge down. Level 2, the knowledge is going to be accurate and your understanding is going to be clear. And to get into level 3, detailed knowledge and a thorough understanding. If we have a look at the levels, to get into level 3, you must cover more than one strategy with at least one in detail, and your connection between the actual strategy and sustainability of food supplies must be extremely clear. All right. Level 2, again, cover at least one strategy. All right, so if you only cover one strategy, you're stuck at the top of level 2, which is not necessarily a tragedy, but why not talk about more if you can? And make reasonable connections between the strategy and sustainability. Just very quickly, if you talked about a large-scale project, which we haven't done yet in this video, but it would be like the Indus Basin irrigation system, maximum level 1, or unsustainable practice. Right, so indicative content. An understanding of sustainability should be seen in the answer, and there's a definition for you. I would probably, when I see the word sustainability, sustainable development, I would define it. All right, that's probably my advice. Right, sustainability means, and obviously link it to healthy and nutritious food. The question does not specify scale or geographical location, so you could talk about sustainability anywhere really. The example we'll learn more about is sand dams and the water security program in Kenya, but you can talk about any. All right, so you could talk about organic farming in England. You could talk about urban farming in Detroit. Fish and meat from sustainable sources, so not overfishing. Seasonal food, eating local food potentially, and reducing waste. An example may be used to support the answer, so like the Detroit urban farming is an example. And it says candidates should then utilise this information to show how the approach is likely to be sustainable in the long term. So if you're eating locally sourced food, all right, well, that means less imports, less food miles, less air pollution, less carbon footprint. You could go down that avenue. Or if you're talking about reducing waste strategies, so for reduced waste, less food will need to be grown, food prices could potentially come down, less fertilisers will be needed to grow extra food that's wasted, it's more sustainable. So have a look, alright, remember, key thing here, it's got to be sustainable and you need to talk about more than one. Have a look, improve your answer, and we will move on. Okay. Really love this case study. This is a small-scale sustainable agricultural development. Now, you could talk about this in the question that just came up if you wanted to. Obviously, you've already done it, so you can't now, but in future. But we're looking at a small-scale project that's going to have long-term positive impacts and minimal environmental damage. So let's go.
Right, we're going to look at small-scale sustainable agricultural development. The example we're going to use is sand dams which have been built in Makueni County, which is in Kenya, all right, and this is on the east of Africa. Now, Makueni County has got brilliantly fertile soil due to the volcanic ash that's been deposited there. However, irrigation of crops is a constant issue because of low levels of precipitation. In response to this, the African Sand Dam Foundation, ASDF, have built sand dams that allow water to be collected and then crops irrigated in a sustainable manner. In addition to this, the ASDF have built water tanks for villages in order to help improve water security. Another thing that the ASDF have done is they've educated local farmers on how to farm using sustainable methods, whilst also giving them access to appropriate technology. As a result, this has increased food security in the region and also increased water security.
All right, I love that little case study. Like, the dams are built all with local materials, and the technology provided to these people's appropriate. They can use it, and it shows with their increased crop yields. All right, moving on then. This is another 6 marker, and it says, use an example from a LIC NEE. The LIC in this one is Kenya, okay, because that's the one we've just looked at, to explain how local strategies are being used to increase sustainable supplies of food. Now, you're not talking large scale, so that's the next case study, Indus Basin. We're talking local schemes. So Makueni County in Kenya, the ASDF, all of the information from that video is what you can put in this answer. And remember, it says explain, TMT. So if you say they've built sand dams, this means that. All right? 6 minutes, 6 marks, pause the video, off you go. All right, then guys, have a quick look at this mark scheme. So 6 marker, it is a level response answer yet again. Basic 1 to 2 marks, clear 3 to 4, detailed 5 to 6. Level 1 to 2, level 1, 1 to 2 marks, you know, limited or generalised knowledge and a simplistic understanding. Alright, level 2, 3 to 4 marks, accurate knowledge, using terms like food security, and you have named your LIC, so in this case Kenya, and level 3, 5 to 6, detailed knowledge, fuller understanding of the concept of sustainability. Alright, now it says, if we move down to here, an understanding of sustainability should be seen in the answer. There's a definition there. You could write the definition of sustainability again in this answer. The answer should also focus on the local scale of an example. Alright, so the local scale is small villages in the Makueni County area of Kenya, the LIC. Now, it depends on which example you use. This one is actually in the mark scheme. So, education about farming techniques, small-scale irrigation schemes, such as sand dams in Kenya. All right. So it's in the spec. It's in the mark scheme. All right. You can talk about this and what it's done. You can talk about the African Sand Dam Foundation, and then go on. Crop yields have increased. More biodiversity around the actual sand dam because there's more water. So that's obviously sustainable, isn't it? Because it's developing natural habitats. And because of the local materials that have been used in the intermediate technology, it's having a big impact on these people. It's improving quality of life, improving food security, improving water security. All right? So have a look at your answers. I'm hoping you did really well on that because it's quite a nice little case study. Mark them and we will move on. Okay, the big one. Large scale agricultural development example. And we use IBIS. Indus Basin Irrigation System. River Indus, the basin of the River Indus, that's why it's called the Indus Basin. Irrigation means watering of land. Alright? Here we go, Mr. Bateau. Go for it.
Okay, so the Indus Basin Irrigation System is a large-scale agricultural development. Here you can see the Indus River and its basin. It crosses India, Pakistan, China and Afghanistan. In response to food and water security problems, the British government built 64,000 kilometres of canals and 3 dams with reservoirs. This was in response to the problem of salinisation, with soil becoming too salty to grow crops. So the solution was to build 64,000 kilometres of canals in order to allow farmers to properly irrigate or artificially water their crops. An example of how this is done is the Tarbella Reservoir, where not only is there water for irrigation of crops, but also the potential to produce hydroelectric power. As a result, 40% more land is available for cultivation and is no longer salinised. And also fish from reservoirs, the 3 reservoirs from the 3 big dams, provides an important source of protein for local farmers. However, one challenge, some farmers upstream take an unfair share of water, leaving farmers downstream still at the risk of salinisation.
Okay, so again, lovely little case study. Think of the social, economic and environmental opportunities and challenges and try and link them to people's standard of living, more money and quality of life, happiness and health. Alright then, so our last question. Alright. I like these questions because it gives you a really good structure to start your answer off. So, there's a statement. A large-scale agricultural development can bring both advantages and disadvantages. Explain this statement using an example you have studied. Alright? So, in that video, it's just shown it can do good things for people and the environment and bad things for people in the environment. You just need to explain them. When you explain TMT, this means that. Alright? So, name of development. You could get away putting IBIS. The examiner would probably know what it is. But why not just for the sake of it, right? Indus Basin Irrigation System. Then in brackets, put IBIS. And then for the rest of the answer, you can just use the acronym IBIS. Alright? Think of the good things, explain them. Think of the bad things, explain them. You don't need to come to a conclusion because it's not saying, to what extent or justify or evaluate. It just wants to explain the good and the bad. 6 minutes, last question, do your best, off you go. Okay, last question, assessment slide. So, level response answer, basic, clear, detailed. Alright? Basic answer will have limited knowledge and limited geographical understanding. Alright, very, very basic comments. Level 2, your knowledge is going to become clear and your geographical understanding is going to be reasonable. Now, reasonable geographical understanding is still relatively good, okay? Because you need to be able to make a point and then explain it. Whereas to get into level 3, you're going to have detailed knowledge, so maybe using examples of the amount of dams or how many canals the scheme has, which were in Mr. Bateau's video, and you can thoroughly understand and explain the advantages and disadvantages. Now, if you look at this up here, max top level 1 for small scale or local development. That means if you talk about sand dams and you do it well, you can still only score 2 marks maximum because it's asking for large scale. The sand dams in Kenya was a local scheme. And max top level 2 if development not named or cannot be inferred from your answer. So if you don't mention Indus Basin Irrigation System, or it's not obvious what you're talking about, which if you don't name it, realistically it's not going to be, you're not going to get into level 2. But you'll all know that and you'll all put that in your you know, the box where it says name of project. It's going to vary, it says here, depending on the project you have chosen. But ultimately, advantages, there's more food, there's more fish in the free reservoirs. That means protein consumption goes up, means people are healthier. However, disadvantages, the main one on here, it's not really, you could talk about the negative impact the dams have on the natural environment and explain that, loss of biodiversity and things like that. But the main one is the fact that although the scheme does work for some people, farmers upstream take an unfair share of the water. This leads to people downstream having maybe even less water than they had originally. Their crops are going to struggle to grow, so yields will be lower. This will reduce quality of life and health for these people. All right, so some advantages, but some disadvantages. Have a look at your answers. Check that you have done it as best as you can, and if you haven't, add any comments from this mark scheme. Well done, guys, if you've worked all the way through. All right, it's been a big session, but the knowledge you've gained and the skills you've gained are going to help you enormously in the exam. Respect.